Excellent. Excellent. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the spoiler room. Venturing down the stairs, pulling up the chair, and popping. Hey, I did it. Your favorite drink as we talk movie spoilers tonight. Yes, I've got Not Your Father's root beer, opened with a Point root beer bottle opener because Wisconsin represent. There we go. Anyway,
I had chicken fingers for dinner tonight with Guy Fieri's root beer flavored barbecue sauce.
Ooh,
It's
that
barbecue
sounds
sauce
interesting.
that tastes like root beer. My family thought it was disgusting. I loved it.
Yeah, well, I actually had we went to a supper club because Wisconsin.
Ooh.
And went to a supper club. We have a supper club in town, the Sky Club, which is the home of the very first salad bar. If you're wondering, it is touted as actually having way back when created the first salad bar, which took off back in the day.
Dude, I got to get to Steven's point. Did you ever watch the documentary about the history of the supper club?
No, I didn't, but I wanted to because
I'll have to find the name of it because, I watched it years ago. You'd probably get a kick out of it.
Because if you're in the Midwest, supper clubs are a thing, especially in Wisconsin. Us Polacks and Germans love our supper clubs. But I had the most delicious food. It was unfortunate because they were understaffed, but so we were patient. Had a wonderful waitress, but the food was just onion rings with a tasty breading, and the onion was thick and crisp inside. It wasn't like, noodly. It was crisp, and my steak was made perfectly, and my son had this brisket burger, which was a burger with brisket on top and peach whiskey barbecue sauce on top of that. Oh yeah. Yeah, if you ever make your way up to our great central Wisconsin, I will definitely take you to the Sky Club.
I'll be there by 7 tomorrow morning. Just gotta get my affairs in order.
There you go. But we are not here to talk about food. We are heading back to another wax museum tonight, folks. We started this month off with It's So Lifelike, where we went to the House of Wax, and now we're visiting Waxwork as part of our Horror of 1988 series, which has sparked this wonderful menagerie of films we've covered this year so far. Good, bad, and what just out there. And Waxwork. Wow. But yeah, it's been a fun ride so far. We're not done yet, but Horror of 1988 Waxwork we have here starring Zach Galligan, among others, directed and written by Anthony Hickox and Mr. Ian Simmons. Give us that synopsis of Waxwork, if you can.
Well, someone saw the original Vincent Price House of Wax and thought, what if we mix this with Fright Night? End of synopsis.
You're not far off. You're not far off now that you mention it that way.
No, it's... Help me out, Mark. There's a scene at the end of this movie where Zach Galligan bursts into the lecture hall of his, what is it about wax movies and like secret ex-Nazi scientists / teachers / professors? Because we got another one in this movie.
We do.
But he bursts into this lecture hall and drags Deborah Foreman out under the pretense of he's sick and he needs her help or whatever. But they're running through the school to like get to the waxwork. And it's like, at first I thought all these people were in college because there's this giant lecture hall in the round. But then they're running and it looks like they're running through a high school. I'm like, I don't know what world I'm in anymore.
I think it was college. I mean, it was a college lecture hall. Why it was, I'm not sure. It doesn't matter with it. This film, David, I'm putting it out there now. David Warner is in this they shot all his scenes in 2 days, but he's in here for a little bit as the host of the Waxwork, this mysterious place that just pops up out of in the middle of a neighborhood. And he plays the host to the Waxwork place and invites this group of, I guess, college kids to visit a private showing of his wax stand-ups and such, and his whole the artwork which he's done with all these wax figures and recreation of scenes and whatnot. A private showing, and they go in, and of course shenanigans and weird things ensue, including a little person who is the butler or the greeter, followed by, as he's described, a lurch type person who's extraordinarily tall, who also is a servant to David Warner's character, with the Waxwork Man, as he's credited in here. And of course, bad things happen to these folks with these waxwork scenes, but different than House of Wax, because in House of Wax, we just had crazy people making wax figures out of people. But here, Ian, we're going to a whole different level.
And, you know, I wouldn't mind someone remaking Waxwork and tightening things up a bit, because I'd never seen this movie before. I'd seen the trailers for it and all that, but it's interesting because these wax kind of tableau, you've got like a vampire sucking the blood of a dame on some steps. You've got an Egyptian tomb and like the mummies and graveyards and all this stuff. They're all behind these roped off kind of partitions. If you cross the partition, you actually get sucked into this dimension where you're actually part of the scenery. And it's kind of a neat effect because you're kind of going into like this mirror, but there's like little laser outlines of things. And I'm not describing it properly, but it's a cool idea. But I was expecting it to be like all in one night kind of thing. But they spread out over the course of several days, and it just breaks up the action and the intensity and allows it to be more of a copy of Fright Night, which bugged the crap out of me. But then I saw this when I looked up on IMDb that it's listed as a horror comedy. I'm like, I thought this was just a straight horror movie because the poster is a great movie poster, but it looks just like something out like a horror film. But this genuinely is a kind of goofy horror comedy. The climax is the climax of Blazing Saddles. with all these crazy people in different outfits from different genres fighting each other, and you got a guy in like an armored wheelchair, and you know, people throwing knives and bullets and stuff.
They're fighting the evil waxwork figures that have come to life thanks to the 6 souls that have been taken apparently, and it opened up a portal to releasing these evil souls.
Yeah, it gets kind of convoluted because like they have 18 of the world's most evil killers and mad people, and if they can get 6 souls to do some kind of math equation, then the 18 people will be resurrected and unleashed on the earth. But some of these 18 people are like actual monsters.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
Well, it's a screenplay they wrote in 3 days. So what do you?
Is that true?
Yeah. Apparently, according to trivia, Anthony Hickox wrote this in 3 days. And it does feel like that. What's interesting with this film is if they would have gotten the bigger budget, and now this is Vestron. Now, back in the day, if you're not familiar in the 80s, Vestron actually was, they churned out some stuff to the wide, to the big screen. Vestron Video, they weren't just to video. They did put out a couple of widescreen stuff, and so this is kind of a bigger studio. You can tell there's a budget to this, far bigger budget. I looked at this going, wow, this is a studio trying to be Full Moon. like this is a studio trying to, because we watched Head of the Family, and it has some of that tone. But looking at this, if you watch it, it just feels like there's a good chunk that was just cut up in this film. The editing in this film I think, hurts it a little bit because it felt like there was more there and that they trimmed it down for one reason or another. Because of the way some scenes go together, you're just like, okay, I'm just rolling with it now. Or was it just me?
I don't know. it's just it does feel very episodic. And in fact, I think it purposely so, because every time one of the characters gets sucked into their tableau, I wrote down, chapter 1. It's, was it Dana Ashbrook or whatever his name gets pulled into the werewolf reality. And then number 2 was China in Dracula's castle. It's like it's almost like an excuse for a backdoor anthology. I don't mean that in the Jenna Jameson sense. I'm talking about.
Wow, that one didn't think of that till he brought it up. Thanks, Ian. Now that's forever. Yeah. Okay.
You might even say you didn't see it coming.
Sorry.
Anyway,
neither did she.
Wow.
Oh.
Let's pull out of this. Sorry, Mark. Didn't mean to make you spit. Anyway,
it's okay. I swallowed it.
Whoa.
Oh.
That cream soda. I'm gonna stop. That's what she said.
All right. Sorry, folks. This film just is so weird. It
is,
so
and that's the thing is, like, you've got these tonal shifts within the stories themselves. Like when China, who is the kind of the blonde, she's the more with it together girl, and she's got the not nerdy, but she's got the less cool chick that she hangs out with, Sarah. China goes into this Dracula castle. She meets a whole bunch of vampires. At one point, she runs into this lower level crypt with all these white marble walls, and she sees the guy who I guess in that reality would have been her boyfriend or something. He's strapped to a table, and half of his leg is gnawed off because the vampire's been snacking on him. And then a vampire familiar comes in, and there's this whole chase through this small marble room. And at one point, the vampire lunges across the boyfriend's body and ends up landing on part of the severed leg. You're like, ow! It becomes very comedic and absurd. And then, the scene after that, she escapes and she runs into actual Count Dracula, and he like seduces her. And when he bites into her neck, the camera pulls back and it becomes the wax scene that she, I think, had encountered earlier, like when walking through the room. So it's all very surreal. So yeah, the editing is very choppy, as you say, but I think that they manage the shifts in the tone very well. It doesn't feel like, hey, this is goofy and stupid, but I'm supposed to be scared. No, they separate the scarier stuff from the goofy stuff. The Egyptian tomb is another one. I was genuinely chilled with the way that ended with, there's a mummy in the tomb. There's a mummy that comes to life and attacks the kind of the Tomb Raider, trio. Yeah. But the explorer girl gets shoved into the crypt, and then there's a snake like crawling its way up her. Plus there's a mummy in there with her. And then the hero guy, he gets shoved in there by the other mummy. And then they're both entrapped in there, and puts the giant sarcophagus cover on top of it. And that's it. And you just imagine you've got two people trapped in a dark crypt with a living mummy and a snake that could bite them at any time. And it's pitch black. I'm like, that's brilliant stuff.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of good stuff. Don't get me wrong. I love this movie for its wild and wackiness and just unusual approach to something, especially in the 80s, like you said, especially with the way the poster and everything's promoted for it to be straight up horror, to have comedic elements mixed in with these wonderful moments, which, while I say the editing is choppy as far as it's the non-Waxwork scenes are more chopped up than the Waxwork scenes. You're right. There's a werewolf scene, which we get a werewolf in here. There's a reason why it looks like a howling werewolf. It's because it was asked of the special effects guy to make a werewolf that looks like one from The Howling.
Okay.
And that's what you get in here. If you've seen The Howling, you'll look at this, you go, that looks pretty damn familiar. But there's another cut there to where they're on a set, and then he's being chased, and when he eventually gets bit by the werewolf and he starts to turn and he gets shot by the hunter of the werewolf, they cut to the Waxworks area, but it's seamless. So it's like he does the scene. The guy brings up his gun. He shoots the guy who was one of the friends of Zach's character, Mark.
Mark, yeah.
And his body goes limp. And the way the camera angle is, you're so into that scene and you're in the cabin, suddenly it pulls back, like you said, with the vampire scene. Same thing here. It pulls back. Suddenly we're in the Waxwork again.
The one thing that killed that moment for me is when we pulled back, because, yeah, you're right. You see the collapsed werewolf body almost in a shadowy corner, and it pulls back and you see the room. The other werewolf is sitting up at the table, at like the dinner table. I'm like, what?
Well, that's because that was John Rhys Davies' character, who makes a short, brief appearance in here, who turns into the werewolf.
Right, but he didn't like finish that scene sitting at. I don't think he wasn't even sitting at the table when he was a werewolf. I just think if there had been like some of the other bodies, or even just have the werewolf in like a fearsome pose or something, but it just looks so silly of him like sitting upright at the table. It's like, we're just gonna put this puppet here until we figure out how to pose him later, and they just forgot to do the posing later part. But no, I agree that transition, a lot of the transitions in this movie work really well.
They do. I mean, and then later on too, when it's down to Mark and Sarah, interesting thing they do with the Sarah character, which we'll get to in a minute. But the Mark and Sarah, Mark ends up getting pulled into this black and white zombie movie, which was great. And this is where he figures out this film, in case you go into it thinking it's meant to be a standalone horror film, much like, House of Wax and some of these other ones, you're going to be disappointed. I honestly think, and I didn't see it in trivia, but Anthony Hickox was making this as an homage to other horror films. This whole film is his love of other horror films, because the whole zombie, the different, what's the word you use? Because I can't pronounce it, of the Waxwork scenes.
The tableau.
Tableaus. Thank you. So fancy. Well, look at us. We've got to put our pinky up now for the rest of the episode. Anyway, the tableaus.
I never put mine down.
I don't want to know your kinks, but anyway, these tableaus, they do recreate classic horror scenes, and what Mark discovers is that if he doesn't believe in them, they can't hurt him, which is a very reminiscent of Nightmare on Elm Street, to where if I don't believe in you, you can't hurt me. There are other scenes, like we mentioned, The Mummy. There's Phantom of the Opera at one point that shows up. We don't get to see that tableau. That was interesting. The one college kid goes into it, and suddenly he appears dead as one of the wax figures. We don't even see his adventure into that. So they play those as well, because they're working on a limited budget, obviously.
But it's also a neat idea, which is that time acts differently when you're inside the reality of the scene versus standing outside and looking at it. Like, to you, it just, maybe it doesn't even appear. It's just like, it's almost like you kind of didn't notice that there was a dead body there before. Or if there was, you're like, oh, it's just a dead, wax figure, not realizing that it used to be a real person. It's I really liked what they did with the kind of time and space elements of that. And I do appreciate that they didn't show everyone, because some of this, I mean, the movie's not that long, but I feel like I was grateful that we didn't get to see everybody go into their own reality. Some restraint was in order, for sure.
Well, yeah, because you end up starting to get into the rinse, wash, repeat. The gimmick's there for like 3 of the 6 people that you're supposed to have captured, but we don't end up seeing like 2 of them, which, I appreciate as well, because it does break it up. And it also plays with your imagination, because like the guy getting sucked into the Phantom of the Opera, suddenly he's laying dead. You're just like, wow, how the hell, what the hell happened to him in there, in that scene. But yeah, you have Vampire Dracula. You end up having Frankenstein, who, by the way, was played by Kane Hodder when the guy comes alive. When the guy comes alive at the very end, because of all the wax figures getting the 6 souls, the Frankenstein guy apparently was actually Kane Hodder in the Frankenstein. outfit.
It
So
was the same year that he debuted as Jason. That's what 88 was a good year for Kane.
it was. At least that's according to trivia. But you also get some other scenes in here, and apparently, according to trivia, he wanted to actually include more things, more references in here. That's why I feel like this whole thing, if you look at how it plays up, it may have been intentional that it was a bit of a play to Fright Night, because I think this entire film of comedy horror is made to be this homage, this send up, this his love of horror films, because apparently there were 3 characters that were supposed to be in the display in the Waxworks, but because of legal reasons they couldn't. Jason Voorhees, 5 children from Village of the Dam, and The Thing were all supposed to be in the Waxworks. So reading up the trivia on that and then seeing how he did the different tableaus, the different scenes where they're all most of them are classic horror character scenes. This really is, I think, is his intended send up to horror films, just kind of having this kind of fun with it.
Oh, sure. And, I wonder if I'm surprised that he ran into those legal issues, because he does interpretations of those monsters. Like the Phantom of the Opera guy has a different mask. He's got a mustache.
Yeah.
It's a cool look to it. But much like Fred Decker did with the Monster Squad the year before, where, it is the Universal monsters, but they don't look like you remember the Universal monsters looking, especially like the Gill Man, the Wolf Man had his own kind of aesthetic. So, I mean, like Village of the Dead, you could have gotten 5, albino looking kids, Jason, maybe it's a square hockey mask, I don't know. And The Thing, that's so easy. It's just a mutated looking monster thing with tentacles, I mean, the homage thing is great up until like there's one that I was like, oh, you push it too far, buddy. It's when Sarah feeds the little person to the Audrey 2.
And it says, feed me?
Feed me.
Yeah, well, it was actually supposed to be, I think, a pod from the Body Snatchers, but, it also is a flower for the Feed Me. I think it was kind of trying to duel, because he had a replica of the one body popping out of the pod, and then she feeds it, to Feed Me, which the baby, by the way, was from It's Alive.
Yeah.
So that's the demonic baby from It's Alive. You get, there's 18 total. As we mentioned, that's the key thing, because 666 is 18, and these final 6 souls that they're trying to get are the ones that are going to release this evil onto the world, and that's why he only invited 6, because his character was like, you are only going to invite up to 6 people. That my horrible David Werner accent. It was great that they got David Werner in here, and in all honesty, this film, you folks, got picked randomly last month. So I did not intend for us to deliberately cover a David Werner film given recent events. But I'm glad we did, because even in this small role, he was great. He really was a great choice.
He was. And he did have that humor, because when he was talking to, the whole Phantom of the Opera thing, the one kid was like, or he was talking about the Phantom of the Opera. Oh, I love that movie. And the Waxwork man says, they made a movie about the Phantom of the Opera. and then he's like, yeah. Then as he shoves the kid into the display, he disappears, and he walks away. And he just says, they'll make a movie about anything nowadays, won't they?
Yeah.
Just these like little asides. It's very dry. And he reminded me like, oh my gosh, I'm getting old. Roddy McDowell. We're talking about Fright Night.
Right.
I would have loved to have seen David Warner as Peter Vincent. I think that would have worked out really well. That would have been fun.
Or have Peter Vincent show up at the Waxwork and interact with David Werner's Waxwork.
Well,
man.
he kind of did in that uncle guy in the wheelchair or whatever, Sir Wilfred or whatever the hell his name
Sir
was.
Wilfred, who Michael Gough, Sir Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, and Donald Pleasance were all up for the role of Sir Wilfred, but instead it was picked by I do believe he was Bigelow in Time. He was played by was it Brian Keene? I forgot his first name, but he was in if you've seen it's a British show and a movie, and it was interesting because that's where I recognized him from. But he's been in other things as well. Brain fart. Let me look it up. Google. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Patrick McNee ends up playing. McNee plays from the Avengers. He's in here, and it was great seeing him. But yeah, he shows up in this armored wheelchair, and again, another signal that this, I think, is intended for an homage to horror films more so than just be a standalone. Is we literally have the pitchfork crowd showing up at the Waxworks to take out the monsters,
including Jenkins, the butler from the opening. And that's the weird thing is like it's like the kids from Less Than Zero going to a messed up Waxworks, because Zach Galligan playing he's nothing like Billy Peltzer in this movie, that's for sure. He's like this spoiled, entitled rich kid. The opening scene, he's like having a fight with his mom at this long dinner table, and she said, "Now drink your milk. You're late." Oh, that's the line. So they are in college, because she says, "Now drink your milk. You're late for college."
College, yes.
And he's like angry that she won't let him have coffee. He said, "But Mom, I need the caffeine."
Caffeine.
And then it cuts to him like as he's leaving, and his butler is there and like putting a cigarette in his mouth and lighting it and handing him
giving him coffee.
He gives him
coffee. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then asking him if he wants to drive, and no, he says he's going to walk. And yeah, you're right about the Less Than Zero. I was trying to picture it. I'm like, because the characters as well, and that's why I think really, as much as this is horror, this is more satirical comedy homage to horror films, and that's again, not a slam. It's just if you go in thinking you're going to get a more serious horror film with the title and the cover and everything, you're going to be disappointed. But if you go into this film looking at it as this kind of just tongue-in-cheek poke fun, and yeah, you do get the serious moments, but overall you look at it, it's just this kind of joyous little celebration of horror films, because all the kids, you're right, from Less Than Zero were dressed like you'd seen the Brat Pack or something, like, they were in the straight ties, kind of that 50s beatnik type of look. All of them were, even when they were casually sitting around the lounge, they had the straight black tie and the suit, most of them, except Sarah, who was the virgin of the group, who was dressed like literally like Sandra Dee from Grease.
Yeah, she had like Bobby socks and all that. Yeah. But as you alluded to earlier, that she gets a little something extra out of this Waxworks adventure when she runs into the Marquis de Sade.
Well, we've got our Mark character who was with China, who is the wild one, and let's not play off why they named her China. I don't, but she was the wild, more experienced of the pair, even though she was friends with Sarah. But Sarah liked Mark, and Mark wasn't quite seeing it. He was pining over China, though China was literally like a one night with him, and she's off to her next conquest already, very confidently. And yeah, so they've placed Sarah this demure type of innocent, even to the point of when they go through some stuff at the Waxworks, and they end up just leaving because they're like, screw this, our friends must have left already. Never mind that, hey, that dead corpse over there looks like one of our friends. Nah, never mind, we're just gonna go home. He kisses her. He goes, you want to come up? And she says, like, I'm just looking for something more right now. And he's like, oh, okay. And she's like, thank you. And so she, playing it innocent. And then you're right. Who gets probably because for an 80s horror film, when we've covered many horrors of 1988, and there's been some exploitive scenes in here, this one doesn't have any nudity, but it still has some interesting sexual moments with the Marquis de Sade and our virgin lady who really does not mind being the victim of Marquis de Sade in this, in a surprising turn for her character, which just was like, okay. I'm like,
Well, and the thing is, like, it can't even be put down to like, oh, she was under some kind of a magic spell. This was just her sexual awakening. She's, brought in, roped up, kind of spread across between two pillars or whatever, and then whipped mercilessly by the Marquis de Sade. And then Mark comes in, Mr. Hero, with his gun, brandishing his gun. He's like starting to undo her chains. And she's like, no, don't. She's like, not talking to the Marquis. And then she gets freed and she like runs over and just like grabs the Marquis's leg and won't let go.
Well, they tried to play that she was under the spell of the tableau. Maybe.
Right, and but that's the thing, is like that didn't happen to anybody else in the the movie.
No, yeah, the other people, when they got into the scene and they realized they're in some alternate dimension, they kind of roll with it. They kind of play their role, but they know they're not that person. But someone's calling them this name, so okay, yeah, I'll come over and help you with this tomb, or I'll help you try to, fight off this werewolf. And in this one, yeah, it's interesting how they play that character, because I know this is going to sound bad. I apologize to all, but as far as for her character, I think it's far more interesting if they played it to where she wasn't under the possession. Like you said, it's this underlying, passion that she had all along that just gets awakened, like, visiting the Marquis de Sade. It's because when she first sees his scene, she's entranced by it almost, and she is a well-versed person, so she knows the story of the Marquis de Sade, and she willingly goes into this, and yeah, it is an awakening for her character, and I kind of like that approach more than because I like it as far as a character goes, because I think it gives it more levels than just, oh, she was possessed, and no, she wouldn't have, this isn't something that she was into at all. Maybe not that extreme, but still, I like, that's far more of an interesting approach, I think, if it was not possessed.
Well, I mean, if you think about her situation, she doesn't necessarily know that she's going to die in this waxwork tableau. She decides to stay there. If she does find that she's attracted to being tied up and whipped, where's the downside? She doesn't have anybody in the real world that is interested in her in the way that she's perhaps interested in Mark. So yeah, I mean, I can see they could have really expanded this, maybe in the remake she just decides to stay. Maybe she helps Mark escape, but she's like, no, I'm good here.
Again, it's just from an interesting character perspective. There's an opportunity here that to give a character that you wouldn't expect to have another layer or two to them, to give them another layer or two, to them in this film. But yeah, there's some other Waxworks figures that show up once they get all 6 souls. One of them's a Snake Man, and I'm surprised it wasn't in trivia, but I'm going to say it right now. The Snake Man in this highly, highly resembles the Snake Man from the Dennis Quaid Nuke movie. Dreamscape.
Yes.
The snake, you only get to see the snake guy for a little bit. And it wasn't actually supposed to be a snake guy, but again, licensing or whatnot, they ended up making it a snake guy. The snake guy looked a lot like the snake suit from Dreamscape. Like, the first time I watched this was many years ago. I watched it, I'm going, it's the snake from Dreamscape. Another film that just creeped the shit out of me for years.
Oh, my God.
Oh, you too? Oh, man. Folks, if you're a child of the 80s, nukes were everywhere. The nuke scare was real. When you were a kid, you were scared there were going to be bombs dropped, and it reflected in film. And Dreamscape was one of those films for me that was difficult to watch. I enjoyed it, but it creeped the hell out of me with the snake guy and the post-apocalyptic nuclear landscape. We should do a show on that sometime if we could get through it. But
Well, that's the thing. I don't think I've ever watched Dreamscape all the way through. It was one of
Really?
those movies that was on HBO. It was one of those weird phenomena where it was on HBO at the time, and whenever I watched it, I would always come in at the same spot. So I've seen parts of it like 100 times, but I don't think I've ever watched it all the way through.
Oh man, maybe we should do a show on it. I'll think about that. But getting back to Waxworks again, another familiar design. There's some other creatures that show up later on that are very familiar, and it's really a weird film because the way this film starts off, you think it's going to be kind of basic. Like you said, you think it's going to be contained to one night with these kids trying to survive the waxwork. And it doesn't. They actually get the cops involved who think Mark is in on it. They think he's the murderer guy, the worst cop in the world.
Well, but that's the thing is that's where the Fright Night connection really came home to me. Is they escape or they leave.
They leave.
And the next morning or whatever, Mark is like, something's going on at that house. So he goes to the police, and he has the police officer accompany him to the house during the daylight. They're like, yeah, we need to go in there because, in Fright Night, it was like, yeah, you'll find a coffin in the basement. And this one is like, yeah, he's got my friends in there. And David Warner, to his credit, is like, there are no kids in here unless they snuck in last night illegally.
Yeah, and he shows up too. It's funny because when we first see his character, he's all like in this kind of presentation Wizard of Gore type outfit, with the cape and everything. When he invites the two girls over, and then when they open it up in the morning, he's dressed like Michael J. Fox from Family Ties, with the suit and the tie and the button down. It's all white too. It's like Mr. Rogers,
Oh yeah, and I just slight detour. I should be used to this by now in movies, but. Whenever you have an all-white room or an all-white outfit, it's going to end up covered in blood. And that crypt, the bit where China goes into the basement mausoleum, whatever, that's all white, but it doesn't stay that way. It was a great scene. But no, back to the Fright Night connection. Yeah, the cop ends up like the kid says something stupid, and they end up like leaving, and the cop's all embarrassed, like, I can't believe you had me harass this fine, upstanding member of the community. Yeah.
But then later on, he's going through the files because he had looked through. We aren't seeing it, and this is part of where the editing is that he went into the waxworks, the door's closed. We see it from Mark's perspective where the cop went in, and then he comes out, and oh yeah, nothing's going on. And he, from the camera and the audience perspective, he looks at like 2 tableaus total, and he's done. He's like, yeah, you know what, I'm done. So then later on, there's a scene where the cop is looking through some missing person files, and all of a sudden there's these flashbacks to all these Waxworks figures that resemble people that were missing. But we didn't see him look at those tabloids. It's just suddenly we're getting shots from Waxwork scenes we hadn't even seen until that little flashback scene even. And I'm just like, when did he see those?
3 days, Mark. You said it yourself. 3 days.
He wrote it in 3 days, and it feels like that. Because what do you care about that? You just want to see more crazy antics. Is what you want.
One of the details I liked about this movie is Mark. It is kind of genius casting because. Zach Galligan was, Billy Peltzer, the hero of Gremlins. So to see him in this kind of like a douchebag role, he's constantly like, but he's Billy Peltzer. They're like, no, he's not. They're like, but I'm kind of warming up to him. And then there's bits where he gets in trouble for talking in class in his college lecture, and his literal Nazi teacher says, I want a 20-page paper on this and this and this by tomorrow. He gets caught talking again. Now you got to make it 40 pages on the history of world dictators. Mark goes home and he has his maid write the papers for him. And then later in the middle of the movie, I think after he after they leave the waxwork, but before he goes to the cops,
Right.
he goes home and he sees his maid, like, or we see her in her room, like at a desk, like crying and yelling at herself in Spanish because she's so frustrated. And he comes in and is like, "So is my paper ready?" And she hands him like this completed paper. He's like, "Oh, thank you, Consuela or
Yeah.
whatever." And it's like he starts reading the paper. It's like, the trouble with dictators, they have the shouting voices and the small mustaches.
Yeah, it's such a random scene. It's like, it adds nothing. It's like, I was not sitting through the whole film going, wow, how's he going to get his paper to his legit Nazi? And again, when you see this teacher, this tells you, if you hadn't gotten the gist already, and we see the teacher early on with literally not the American flag in class, but the Nazi flag, and you think, oh, maybe it's a teacher who's play acting in order to teach his kids history, and you're like, oh no, he's a straight up Nazi, especially the second scene, like you said, where Mark's acting sick. He's like, and that's why Mein Kampf should be considered a literary work of art.
That joke is doubly funny because I don't know if you've ever tried to read Mein Kampf. It's terribly written. And that's because it's just one of those, I don't want to get off on a whole tangent here.
No.
But it's one of those books that you hear about. And you're like, it's such an important historical work, written, the precursor to a genocide. I actually bought it, and it's impossible to get through the entire thing because it's super long and super dull. But I read the introduction, and the thing that struck out that was so funny was like the person who wrote the intro was like, yeah, the historical and literary scholars are often flabbergasted when they first read Mein Kampf at just how terribly written it was. But yeah, like the other thing about, you see the Nazi flag, but then like right behind it is this giant World War II propaganda poster with the worst caricatures of like a Japanese soldier on it. Like, oh my God, that's right. This is 1988. You can show that in like a mainstream horror movie. It's like, it's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, it's just, this film really is an amalgamation to where I think if the budget was a little lower, because the music for sure is like this electronic synth, like they picked whoever they could to get the music for it. And don't get me wrong, I like the music, but especially if you watched late 80s, early 90s Full Moon, as we've watched a couple here, you listen to it going, wow, is this Charles Band's brother making the music for it? Because the music sounds like something right out of a Full Moon feature, this playful electronic synth music, kind of like we heard in Head of the Family, which is weird if you're going into it going, oh, I'm ready to see some serious Waxworks killing, and you're like, wait, why is this kind of playful synth music playing? And then you realize why, because this film is a bit of a roller coaster as far as tone. And again, I'm not saying this is an insult. It's just wild. You're watching this film and you're thinking, okay, it's going to go one way, and suddenly, yeah, you get a serious moment in here. They actually give just a little bit of weight to the deaths, like you mentioned, the tomb and the weight. The deaths that happen aren't exactly played for laughs. Like the werewolf one, the first one where the kid gets bit. The werewolf gets shot and killed by the hunter with the silver bullet, and then the kid starts turning, and he's actually in pain, and you kind of feel it a bit, and the hunter puts him out of his misery. You're just like, that got heavy quick. We went from howling werewolf to this, and then he shows up in the tableau, and you're just like, wow, I really don't know what to feel right now.
Right, because literally like 8 minutes earlier, when he first shows up in this, this other dimension, he says, okay, who put the acid in my drink again? It's total comedy, right? But also the bit where China meets Dracula, there's a great, when he's kind of taking her into his arms, the camera kind of swirls around them, and it looks like a trashy supermarket romance novel. Like,
Yeah.
though it looks like a painting. It's really kind of cool looking. It's just not something you expect from a horror movie, and B, a horror comedy from '88.
Yeah, well, the vampire scene's a classic thing. Another prime example, because China shows up. She plays along because, she's like, okay, she's a very strong personality. She's like, I can play along with this. So she sits down. You could tell she's kind of put pieces together that this might be vampire. She's not quite sure. There is definitely some goth vibes going on, early 80s goth, if you will. And so she's just like, there's something weird, but she plays along because you got a attractive, steely-eyed Dracula, and they put the dish down in front of her of what to eat. And she's like, at first she's taken aback and being disgusted, but then the way her character is, she's like, oh, it's been a while since I've had steak tartare. And they're like, but you got to put the sauce on it. And the sauce is blood. And everybody in the crowd watching this goes, oh, those are people bits, and that's blood. Is she going to eat it and throw up? She cleans her bowl, which is a surprise.
Well, it's a little salty, but that's all part of its charm. That's how they describe it.
I love that description too. I'm just like, wow, okay.
Yeah, it's not exactly what you'd expect. In all of these situations, there's something a little bit different than the way you expect it to play out that makes it interesting and worthwhile.
And that's what keeps me interested. It's fun because you take these all turns, and then we get this other. Again, go into it thinking of this as this homage to horror films. We get this connection of Mark with the Waxworks man as far as his lineage goes, because of course you're going to, right? It's a small California town.
That's the one bit where, like, towards the end they start these big mythology dumps. I'm like, I don't care about any of this. Just like fight each other. You don't have. It doesn't matter that you're the grandson of Waxman's, the former partner, or there's this blood vendetta. All of that's filler to get this thing to 90 minutes.
Well, because then they play at too that the whole Marquis de Sade thing. There's something that gets dropped that relates to the Sarah character that makes you think that there's more to her character than the demure person that she portrays to her friends, because there's this random book in a chest in Mark's attic while he's looking through the papers and finding the connection between his family and that. She opens this magical book, and I do say magical because the letters on it glow Marquis de Sade. Now, this isn't in the Waxworks. This is just in some chest that is Mark's grandfather's. And she starts to open it, and that's when Mark shows up. Which, I'm just like, and we never come back to it. I'm like, what about the book? I'm like, are there mystical books like there were mystical tableau wax area? I mean, what's with the book? Because they come back to the Marquis de Sade later, sure, with the wax at the Waxworks, but I want to know about the book.
I think she was just hoping to find some like ancient porn and get her rocks off there in the attic, and she was interrupted.
Mark kept interrupting her, I guess. I don't know.
I do like your theory. That'll be Waxwork 2 Wax Book. I don't know.
Wax Book. They did make a Waxworks 2. Wax in Time, or I think it was called, or what was it?
Wax in Time?
No, not Wax in Time. No, there is a Waxworks 2 that they made. Lost in Time. Waxworks 2 Lost in Time. So they did do a sequel to this, surprisingly enough, because they do leave it open for a sequel. I mean, after Mark discovers this connection with his family, that just fully drives him that he's got to take out the Waxworks. I mean, if it wasn't the fact that his friends were all dying before, now he really needs. But he visits Sir Wilford, who happens to be his godfather, and they decide they got to burn it down. But they got to burn it down from the inside. I loved this logic by Mark. We have to go inside and burn it down, because if we try to burn it down from the outside, they'll just put the fire out and we'll get arrested for arson. Like, okay, I guess.
There was going to be that one person in the audience, Mark, bring up that question. So they had to explain it. No, it's so random.
It's like, yeah, it's like so random. It's like, wait, why can't you set fire to it from the outside? I mean, if you've got enough gasoline, they aren't going to be able to put it all out. It's an old building. I mean, you know.
Yeah, and you don't have to do it during the daytime, like when people are going to see you.
Just do it at night. Yeah, I'm like, do it at night. They aren't going to catch you. What the hell? I'm like, it's the creepy Waxworks, for crying out loud. You know, I like the house from the outside. David Warner, as we mentioned before, is great. I don't know, it ends, of course, for a sequel. We get Thing, I call it Thing, from the Addams Family, basically a walking hand. It's a hand that Mark cut off from one of the zombies that were chasing him in the waxworks that he is in, and that's where he kind of discovered that, you know, I have power over these waxworks. That hand shows up later. But in between there, go ahead.
I was going to say, we can't forget during the big melee where the secret society of waxworks fighting warriors show up to be the cavalry to help out Mark and Sarah.
That's exactly where I was going, actually. I'm like, we can't miss out this epic fight.
We've talked a bit about it. There's like the Audrey 2 sequence. There's the one that is just so 80s. The vampire transforms into a bat, and the bat starts flying, and randomly this hand reaches out, grabs the back by the neck, says, "Make my day." You see a revolver come into frame and blow the bat's head off.
I loved that.
What the hell is this movie?
It's great because they're fighting all these Waxworks figures, and then you get that scene. You're like, what? And then it's very brief, too. And in fact, it's literally just before the Audrey scene. It's like the director just threw everything in the kitchen sink. He's like, I got all these other references I got to work in. We'll just toss them in at the end of this movie. Because, yeah, you get the whole Audrey scene, but before that is when the bat scene happened. And the Make My Day is literally a throwaway, and it's the way the audio is mixed. You can barely catch it. They literally cut away as he says it, as if to get around some trademark or copyright or something. Like, no, we weren't. What do you mean? He says, make a better day. He didn't say make my day at all. And again, the Fright Night parallel continues in here when Mark is confronted by one of his friends who was turned in their tableau. They were killed. Now they're working for the bad guys. It literally was a you're so cool, Brewster moment with his friends. That's what it felt like.
Yeah. And at one point, the girlfriend of the guy, I think, she comes out and she's some kind of a monster, and she's like, "Take me." And then Mark shows up with a shotgun. He says, "Take this." He blows her away. Like, I like Zach Galligan, but there's just something about the way, like, he does not have a leading man voice. He's like, "Take this." I'm like, what? Oh no.
He's not really an action. He's not an action man. Really ever. No, this is not a role you would exactly expect him in. But it's again, I love seeing actors take chances and be in roles that you don't expect to see him in. And I imagine he was trying to shed a bit of that gremlin, baggage.
I just think that, much like the Italians did in, like, Giallo films, have someone come in and dub a voice. Like, I want to see him go, "Take this," like, "We're going to burn down this waxwork from the inside." Not like, we got to burn down the waxwork from the inside, because otherwise we're going to get arrested for arson. Like, what?
But it fits the whole idea that this is more of that tropish satire type film than, if you got that, because he is so the embodiment of the reluctant hero, whatever, whether or not you see him from seeing that character Lost Boys, or you said Monster Squad, or Fright Night or whatever. Galligan's character is the embodiment of all those reluctant kind of nerdy hero guys who really you don't see as the hero role, but he's kind of forced to do it, and he talks just like him too.
He's more akin, I think, to James Spader's character in Pretty in Pink. Steph.
Okay,
You
yeah.
know, almost the same outfits too, like the white suit jacket at one point. Man, I do like the fact that he spends like his big action outfit is like a freaking blue polo shirt. It's like running around the waxwork fighting evil in a blue polo shirt.
When he's fighting the Marquis de Sade, who just plays with him because they do a sword fight. Because here we've got to have an Errol Flynn sword fight, which literally is. It's like tries to be this Errol Flynn type of sword fight, the fencing fight at all. And Marquis de Sade keeps playing with him, but then he pays for it. You mentioned the "Take Me" line. Apparently, originally, Claire Carey, who plays the actress, was actually supposed to say, "I know you always wanted to fuck me, Mark, fuck me," but she could not bring herself to say it, so they said, "Take me." So she could not say the line. She just was not comfortable with saying the line, so they spun it more to "take me" rather than, you know.
That would have been like the fourth line she had in the entire movie. Was that not in the
Right.
script that she read?
I don't know. Maybe they read, wrote it later. I'm not sure.
That was the 3.5 day.
That was the 3.5 day. This film was budgeted for $3 million. Okay, come on.
Wow.
They did a lot. They actually did a lot for $3 million.
They did. I mean, I'm surprised because the sets and the prosthetics, like, it was remarkable during that big melee, and even during, I think it was before then, when you start seeing all the creatures coming to life, you realize just how many creature effects and makeup effects and wardrobe they had to do. I mean, $3 million. I mean, this is $1988, but they made that stuff. They pushed that to the max.
They stretched it out. They stretched it out quite a bit. So yeah, it's crazy that it was only made for $3 million. And Galligan is commented, if you'll bear with me with the trivia, he had the most trouble with the scene where he pretends to be sick in order to get Sarah out of class.
Oh, I had a lot of trouble with that scene too.
Yeah, he literally says, "I still think I'm pretty bad at it." Hey, we had Stuffed Burrito and Talex and some Twitter folks join us. Thank you so much for popping in. Hey, I believe it is called a raid in Twitterdom. It's been a long time since I streamed, but it's so great to have you here, especially Stuffed Burrito. Check out his Twitter feed, folks. Stuffed Burrito Entertainment, fantastic streamer, good friend of the Spoiler Room, and the guy knows his movie stuff as well. So glad you popped in. But yeah, I guess the question for you then is, sir, did you still find it entertaining, even if it wasn't really the best film made?
Yeah, I did, because it wasn't what I had expected. But I also wish that they'd maybe taken 5 days to work on me. I don't know. It's just, it felt like it needed another pass. But I was also thinking it'd be cool if they were able to remake this movie today with practical effects, no crazy CGI except for maybe the portal stuff. But even the portal stuff I thought was a cool effect for 1988. I like those little electric squiggles whenever people disappear into the tableau. But yeah, it's an enjoyable movie. I don't know if I'd watch it again because it's kind of clunky in parts, but I was very surprised. And I really liked Deborah Foreman from the small part she had in Real Genius, like 3 years before that, which was the exact opposite of. It's almost like her character from Real Genius is what Sarah would grow up to become, like later in college. Like, can you hammer a 3-inch board with your penis? And like, no. That was her line to Val Kilmer, by the way. That's not just me making up a question from Mark.
Well, I'll show you later in the off. Yeah, that'll be for our Patreon. Let's watch Mark. Never mind. Sorry. The effects artist Bob Keane, just so you know, folks, spent 18 hours a day for 8 weeks working on the monsters in this film. And that's probably why they look as good as they do, because for the type of film this is, as much as we've kind of chuckled about it, it is fun, but it does impress you some of the work that went into many of these wax people, especially when they're starting up and moving around. And not all of them get featured up front. yet you could still see they have details. And I give mad respect to that because some of them don't end up in front of the camera.
So, am I understanding that correctly? He did all this by himself, or did he have a team? Do you know? Or
I think he mostly did it by himself.
Wow.
Because I mean, it's $3 million. So, and if you think you've got, Warner on the cast, there's going to go for some of your budget. I mean, this is Anthony Hitchcock's first film. So, this is an interesting film to take on as your first film. But still an interesting one. It's quirky. It's not what you expect from a studio like Vestron, in all honesty. This, again, Spirit of Full Moon. This really felt like that early Full Moon stuff. In fact, it surprises me it's not. with the way it plays out and everything, and just everything about it and how quirky it is, it surprises me not. I think this would pair nicely with Head of the Family, in all honesty.
Yeah, I could totally see that. Yeah.
I think that would make for an interesting double feature with Waxwork.
One thing before we kind of wrap up,
yeah.
I do want to mention it was kind of just a neat story idea. Was it Mark or was it the detective who finds China's body on the staircase, the wax version of it, and goes up and is like feeling her cheek and like actually chisels a piece of wax off of her cheek and finds out that it's hollow inside, so it's an actual wax figure, even though we know that it represents her dead body in that other dimension. When China shows up later during the melee, she encounters Mark and she's got a rip in her cheek. It's the actual actress, but her face is all kind of messed up. And I was like, that's a kind of an interesting idea, that almost like the Elm Street thing. The way that your body is effective in this alternate reality shows up in the real world.
Yeah, I liked that little bit of continuity. I thought it was a nice touch, and you're right. That's one of those things where it's just a visual cue, but it tells you a lot about what's actually going on with these wax figures. That they are truly the wax figures. These aren't like new beings. These are things that were in the set, if you didn't notice them moving when we first get to see the tableaus in the Waxworks, which is fine, but I also found some humor in it as they're going through and looking at it. I'm like, well, those are some pretty moving. I mean, people tried to keep still as best they could, these actors could, but I wonder how many takes they did, because in some of the scenes you literally could see them kind of weaving their arms because they got some of their arms up, and I'm like, oh man, they had to be.
No, it's just drafty in the Waxworks, Mark. It was rocking the statues back and forth.
It's drafty, and just bear with me for a moment, folks. We're going to wrap it up here, but I do want to tie it to a interview I just did yesterday with a certain author, Austin Trunick. We were talking about Canon films and Canon Volume 2. Look for that interview shortly. But what's interesting is we had that discussion about Master of the Universe, how they were going to end it early because of budget, and they had to get creative with it. Well, again, I just picked this film at random. We picked this film at random last month. Didn't plan on featuring a film that does have David Warner in it, though I'm glad we did, because I loved him as an actor, and it is sad to see him pass. But we get wonderful, he'll live on in the films. But this film is the same way as Masters of the Universe, Ian. According to trivia, I had it here that they were going to do, there it is. It was Hickok's first feature. He was nervous about the production until the completion bond. People arrived saying they were out of money and needed to wrap it up. And the result is the heavily truncated battle, which we get. So I suspect we were supposed to get, because of the work done in the makeup effects and everything, a bigger battle than what we get here because of budget, much like a Canon film, where they, nope, money's run out. Work with what you got.
And honestly, that battle goes on for so long that I'm kind of fine with it. I mean, maybe they had to pad it out with like extra footage they had that they hadn't intended to use because they couldn't use other things. But I feel like for the runtime they have just the right amount, because they cut between that and like the fencing, and they're kind of cutting back and forth to different action that's taking place in different, areas. So I'm like, yeah, that's fine.
No, it actually does fit the film, though. I would be interested to see what more they had planned, how many more Waxworks type. So that my mind goes there, but at the same time, you're right. For the ending they have, it's fitting. So yeah, folks, don't go into it looking for a serious horror film. If you go into it looking for a more homage type of just fun, tongue-in-cheek, playful film that is celebrating horror up until that point, I think you'll enjoy this a lot more than if you're looking for a scare film, because it does have some tense moments, but there aren't scares in here, but there's some laughs.
Yeah,
for sure. And the homages. So, folks, Cara was supposed to be with us tonight. She couldn't make it. So it's up to Ian once again. Ian, sir, we only have 3 left of our horror of 1988 films.
This year has just gone by way too fast. I can't believe we're down to our last 3 films.
We're down to our last 3 films. So if you could, sir, take a stab at 1 through 3 and pick a number between 1 and 3 and take a stab at it to see what next month's film will be.
3.
3. All right. Let's take a stab at 3. Whoa. Sorry, I had that on loop, but it's still 3 times.
Yeah, right? It works.
Folks, there's podcast gods out there.
Oh, no.
And, well, I actually think there's podcast devils. Or I get the backup devil. I get, like, the toss-off demon who really isn't a demon, but he can't go to heaven. So he's somewhere in between.
Wait, Mark, Freddy Got Fingered did not come out in 1988.
No. But what did come out in 1988 is Hellraiser. Hellbound. Hellraiser 2. You picked it. And guess what's coming out next month?
Hellraiser.
A new Hellraiser film. I do not plan these things, folks. This is not something that I rig. Okay? I don't rig these things at all. This is just how it plays out. Hellbound. Hellraiser 2 is going to be the film for October, which is horror season. There's a new Hellraiser coming out. I don't know. We're not going to do all 11 Hellraiser films next week. Okay. I've got 1 a week. We're sticking to 1 a week, but maybe we'll see if we work it in. Maybe one of those episodes will be talking the new Hellraiser in preparation for our next horror of 1988 film, which will be Hellbound Hellraiser 2. So stay tuned soon go to specialmarkproductions.com for a schedule for the live streams, and you can see what movies are coming up for the next month, so you can prepare yourself, you can watch them, and join in on the chat like so many wonderful people did tonight. We had Stuffed Burrito, and he brought his crew from Twitch over and raided our channel. We've had some other viewers as well. And now, as always, the floor goes to my crew member, Mr. Ian Simmons, licensed to shill, sir. Shill away.
Thank you. I'm Ian Simmons. I run Kicking the Seat, which you can find at kickseat.com. I also have a YouTube channel, which if you look up Kicking the Seat on YouTube, you'll find me there. Do weekly movie reviews, round tables, interviews, that kind of stuff. So a lot of fun. And we're getting some nice growth on the channels, which is cool to see. So join up. And if you like what you see, feel free to subscribe. And I'm also here every Tuesday, hanging out with Mark for the last like 3, 5,
it's 3 years.
No.
it's you have been a regular on the show, and before that, you popped on once or twice, but you've been a regular on the show now for about 3 years, and you keep coming back for more, as I always say, and I appreciate it quite a bit, sir, that you do. So I appreciate it. I appreciate all our listeners out there growing all the time. Thank you so much for tuning in live stream or on our iTunes as well. We got some of our episodes take off more so than others, which are expected. But I cover films that I think are interesting, and I hope you do too. A little house cleaning. I did notice that our House of Wax episode had a blank spot in there where there was supposed to be an intro. That's been fixed, so that episode has been corrected now. And if you haven't checked it out yet, I've got an interview with Wisconsin horror filmmaker Lauren Barker. She was kind enough to talk to me about her film Cohabitation, which she shot in Milwaukee. And I got another interview with Mr. Austin Trunick, if you didn't hear me talk about it already. Canon Film Guide Volume 2, Volume 1 and Volume 2 at your brick-and-mortar bookstore or online. Order it. It is the ultimate film guide, a respectable one to Canon. And I got the chance to talk to Austin again about some of the stuff in there. We talked about some of the stuff that carried over from the first film, history of Canon, video store. We talked about a lot of stuff. It was a very fun interview. At least I had fun. I hope he did too. And I hope you do too listening to it. Look for that later this week. We got a lot of great stuff coming up here on Special Mark Productions, and all that stuff on the YouTubes. And until next time, folks, we'll just say good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.